Book discussion, Richard Ford, the Sportswriter. This is a piece of poetry. This is it's almost like uh, it's almost like a river just flowing down, a river of words just flowing down. I have made a list of quotes that I paid attention to, quotes that I think are crucial for the book, but also just beautiful. There's just beauty in this writing. Ford's writing is beautiful. I have my issues with some of the techniques and some of the, let's say, just the entertainment value of the book itself is maybe questionable sometimes and things along those lines. But nevertheless, I think this is a very, very important piece of literature. And here's why. I wanna talk about the four things that I think really matter when it comes to this book. And it really goes back to Nietzsche. It goes back to the purpose of life. It goes back to the concept of a person that has agency versus not having agency. I think it's also a book like a really good novel, always a good image of history. We're talking about the 60s and 70s and 80s, particularly the 80s of the United States. So there's a certain snapshot also of a time. And like I always say, the biggest value of literature is really to give us a peek into a historic moment, whatever that may be. In this case, it's something, about 2 decades, 70s and 80s. And I think Ford does a great job at that. It's a time of, I would say, a little bit of desperation. People have lost their faith, lost their interest. I'm going to talk about all this, of course, but just for new listeners, why are we doing book discussions in the first place? Well, we're here at Orange Capital Partners. The purpose is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And reading is not just a pastime. Reading is part of the job. It gives us a perspective. And I think this is a good book where we're going to draw the line between the 80s and today and see that the purpose today is in innovation and technology. And this is what we do. And I think that wasn't the case back then. And that's why people were not as motivated as they should be today, because when you have technology, when you have knowledge, when you have prosperity, when you have the potential for prosperity, people have a lot more purpose in life and life becomes more interesting. This is not even on podcast. It's October 8th, 2023. This is Krim Delco. It's a Sunday no update for the year. We're up 125%. The market's up 12.1. We're outperforming by 112.9%. Richard Ford's The Sportswriter. Again, it's a Sportswriter, excuse me. It's a great book, highly recommended. It's a classic American novel. It's a shame that I've come across only now. He's certainly in the sort of Tom Wolfe league, very similar style, similar time frame. Of course, this was definitely a culture probably back then. The Sportswriter is a person that goes through life and life happens to him. And there's, like I said, there's plenty of quotes. I have a list, a link to it in the show notes with quotes from the Sportswriter. I'm going to mention a few here, but it's way too long. But, the Sportswriter lives in his own mind and on the edge of others. So this beautiful quote that I think describes really beautifully what actually is going on. I think I want to start my discussion of the book actually with the end. I think the end is really it's a cliffhanger, and there is actually sequels to this book, and it's a beautiful book because the end really is what it's all about. It's hope. It gives you an opening. It gives you a window into the potential for what life could be like. I'm going to read a passage now from the end. One natural effect of life is to cover you in a thin layer of what? A film, a residue, a skin of all the things you've done and been and said. I'm not sure. But you are under it. And for a long time, and only rarely do you know it. And in some unexpected moment, you come from under it. And you suddenly feel very good. And in that magical instant, you realize how long it's been since you felt that way. We all feel that way. I'm certain of it, since there's no way that I can feel what hundreds of millions of others haven't. Only suddenly you're out of it, that film, that skin of life, and you think, this must have been the way it was once in my life, as when you were a kid maybe, a feeling of wind on your cheeks and your arms, a feeling of being released, let loose. And since that is not how it has been for a long time, you want this time, you want it to last this time. This glistening one moment, this cool air, so you can preserve a feeling of it. And in truth, of course, this may be the last time you may feel like this again. Beautiful. I think first point again, life happens to us. There's a film that covers us with the things we do, and we start losing sight. We start losing purpose, and then we break through, and there is this cold wind on our cheek, this feeling of we can do something. I think this is beautiful. This would be the first point that I make. The second point I want to connect now to Nietzsche. I think there's a lot of allegories to Nietzsche. There is the concept of the hero, for example. There's a passage in the book where he talks about the team, and the team concept in American sports and sports writing is overemphasizing the team and not really focusing on the hero. And of course, this reminds us on Nietzsche. For the quote is, "The team concept is like the dynamo of the late 19th century. It's too mechanical. You leave the person out, the hero. This is a problem." So there is a scene where he talks about a Serbic Arab woman that he has a relationship with. Her flirtations with all kinds of dark isms have galvanized her intellect and gave her the illusion that she knows why people do things. Like, this woman has agency. She is hedonistic. She drinks, she smokes, of course she has sex. There is this, and she's using actually an Arab woman from Lebanon, which, just as a footnote, my wife's from Lebanon. I think there is something acerbic about these women, something interesting about these women. And this comes across. I'm not exactly a child of those times. I was too young for the sort of 70s and 80s to start forming. Maybe 80s, okay, 70s I was a bit too young. But I think I reflect that same time. I reflect that same feeling of I want to do something. I want to do something. There's another quote. "It's funny how we respect nobility of small mistakes, but neglect the large fuck ups." Like we're just constantly minimizing the risk. We're minimizing everything. We're just a bunch of insurance buying know nothings. Lots and lots of. There's a concept about sports as an excessive, dreary parent exercise of. He talks about sports as an excessive exercise of dreary parenting and a sequence of inconsequential events. And I think this is something, this is a footnote. I feel like that with college soccer here in the United States. That's a different point, but it kind of fits into the Sportswriter theme, that we have, we follow these inconsequential events, and then, what we do is who we're going to be. So if we spend our time with inconsequential events, then this is what we're going to be. We're going to be inconsequential. And I know, let's say, kids are obsessed with sports because they want heroes. They want to feel important. They want to have relevance. They want to have agency, and sports gives them that. Once you're out of that sports life as an adult and you keep following sports, I think the situation changes quite a bit. Again, there is this quote, beautiful quote: "Sports writers, they live within their mind and on the edge of others." So the sports writer is conveying that feeling to the inconsequential followers, the rest of the world, and this is, of course, well, it's a little bit of a it's a sad way to think about it, but nevertheless, it is very pointy. Ford brings in academics, for example. It is another area where I guess particularly in the 80s, there must have been disillusionment with academics. The academics, they behave like Wall Street types. They're they stand on cocktail parties with their younger wives, with bony brown legs, and talk about second homes in Telluride. Academics are not supposed to talk about stuff like that. They're supposed to talk about science, about innovation, about the future, about what's possible, potential, and I think neglecting that, I'm sorry, And I think I wanna put this now, the connection between the novel and where I see we are today. And I think the 80s must have been a time of disillusionment, and I feel the same way in Tom Wolfe's novel, particularly Man in Full, where the United States turns into a paper-pushing society. This is, of course, also reflected in Peter Thiel's work more recently. Now, I do believe that we are a little bit better now than in the 80s, and that is particularly because we had massive innovations in technology, in particular computer science. So we had, Moore's Law, we had a software revolution, we had the internet, now we have AI. So we have hope, we have potential, we have prosperity. That wasn't the case back in the 80s. The 80s, if you just look at the S&P 500, we've done that a lot of Orange Capital Partners. The main companies in the US were large oil companies and banks and insurance companies and maybe pharmaceutical companies that have some innovation, of course. But today it's very different. Today Silicon Valley dominates, and Silicon Valley is on the brink of becoming inconsequential also. But we have this underlying innovative drive. We have every time we think it's over, every time we think Google is going to dominate the world, then TikTok comes along, now Gen AI comes along. So there's a lot of sort of intrinsic resurrection of new ideas, of disruption, and that wasn't the case, or not as much back then. So this is definitely hope. This is something that I think somebody like Richard Ford didn't have, and I'm actually curious to read his sequential novels to see where he stands on that front. I think finally I want to talk about death, actually, which comes also along. It comes along in the book, and there are some interesting quotes. Death is a problem. Christians can't deal with death because it's too severe. It's too unequivocal. It's a mistake in addition. I think this is a very depressing way to deal with death. And I think, I'm not sure what Ford wants to say here, but I would interpret it, if I take Nietzsche back into the conversation, death is worth it if you live life. But if your life is a sequence of inconsequential events, and if you talk about rocks and make them look like mountain ranges, which is another quote, meaning you embellish things and life actually isn't as interesting, well, then death is really just an error in addition. If you live a full life, death is okay. You can say, look, I had it, I did it all. This is what aging happens, and so on and so forth. Or I did that risky thing, and well, it didn't work out, but it was worth it. So I think Ford's definitely applying Nietzsche here too, applying the the Ubermensch, the person that is able to be the best at what she can do, and then come out with it, and whatever happens, that's what life is supposed to be about. So I think the criticism that again comes through in the book about death and the problems of dealing with death and so on and so forth, that is really I would say an allegory to Nietzsche, and this is really the conclusion here. I think this book to me reflects a call for action, a call for agency. We can't just be passive bystanders. We can't let life happen to us. We have to live it. There's plenty of quotes. I put it in the show notes that there's a for example, there's a quote: we're almost always wrong when we're young. This is this goes down to, okay, when we're young, when we're kids, we are hopeful. We're wrong. So what? We make mistakes. We learn. We try and error. We've spoken about this at length in this Not Even Wrong podcast. How important experimentation is, again, death is something Christians are not comfortable with. Too severe, too unequivocal, like a mistake in adding. It's not supposed to be like that. Life is not just some addition of things. Life is a nonlinear sequence, or life is supposed to be a nonlinear sequence of hope, of failures, of joy. That's what life is supposed to be. That's how I interpret this book. And again, to summarize, we have 4 main points. Number 1, break out from that film of life that covers your body and sort of makes you just have life happen to you, break out, feel that cold air, feel that action. Nietzsche comes a lot here, the hero, the a Serbic Arab woman that you have a relationship with. She has agency. She has an opinion. She wants to do things. No, you don't let life happen to you. The sportswriter lives in his brain and on the edge of others. You don't want to live that kind of life. You want to get out of it. And actually, the author does get out of it in the end. And death is not a problem if you live life to the fullest. Thank you.